of learning to live in the land of the dying. And we're going to share with you our journey. For me, it turned out to be an 11-year journey with my grandmother, then my stepfather and my mother, taking care of them in my home, and how they, how we walked through that as a family, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's not an easy journey. It's not an easy journey. And so we're going to share with you some of the things that God taught us along the way. For us, it started with my mother's going blind in one eye. And my stepfather, who I adored, already had Alzheimer's, beginning of Alzheimer's, and my grandmother lived with them as well. So what are we going to do? And so we decided as a family that it was time for them to move near us. They did not want to move at first. It was a very difficult decision because they loved where they were. It was their dream home on the river, and they loved it. And it was a difficult decision for them, but it became obvious that we just didn't have any good choices. And so we started looking for a house that was close to us, that they could be close to us. A house behind us was for sale. And we thought, well, we could just put a gate there and we could walk back and forth and that would work. And then we thought, about building 2 new houses side by side, well, all kinds of things. And my stepfather, who was a godly man, said to me one day, he said, "Sheila, we all need to be in the same house, but separate." I said, "Oh, okay." So being the art major I am, in fact, he often told me I should have been an architect. I drew up a house plan, and it really was. We shared the foyer, and we both had a home on either side of this huge home, and so we set out to build it, and for them to move in with us, and that's what we did. My grandmother lived on the side with them, and Hank and I lived on the other side of the house, and so that was the first step, was getting them to move. And they didn't, it was hard. Unfortunately, and Lynita can tell you about that for them as well. I wanted to tell you that. But unfortunately for us, my parents, it was really, they moved too late. If they'd moved 4 or 5 years earlier, they could have gotten involved in the church. They would have had their own friends. They would have had a life. But consequently, they never did. They came and lived with us, but they never got involved in a church. They've been very involved. They've been teachers, and my father was a deacon and all those things, but they never really established a life that way. And it made it more difficult for us, and it definitely made it more difficult for them. So it was a hard move for them, but we finally convinced them that that's what we had to do. In order to be able to take care of them, that's what we had to do. And they decided to do it. And we built this beautiful home. It's a gorgeous home. And we all lived there like a big Cracker Barrel with a porch all the way across the front. We had about eight rockers, and we'd all sit out there and rock and talk. But that was the first thing, was getting them to move. So maybe you're at that part with your parents of maybe they live out of town or on the other side of town, and trying to take care of them logistically and take care of your life is a difficult thing. My husband was a senator. And so I had to be involved in his life. So there were logistical things even after we moved in that we had to work through, and we'll talk about those later. But Lynita, did you go through the same thing with your parents of trying to get them to move?
Yeah, our story was similar. It was late that they moved. We had decided to let them live as long as they could independently. Everybody's story is different. Everybody's parents are different, and everybody's situation is different. So there's not really everything that Sheila and I talk about right now. It's not like you're wrong if you do this, or you're right if you do this. You just mainly need to follow God, which is what we did for sure. My mom, she was a very strong character. She had taken care of her siblings and her mom at a young age, had quit school to work. So she came up, and that was part of who she was, and it was part of just what had happened in her life that made her that way. So she was a wonderful, wonderful mom, but she was strong. In other words, she wanted to take care of you. So as when it got to where she couldn't take care of herself anymore, that was very difficult for her because she just didn't know how to receive, but she knew how to give. And so that was hard. And but it was good at the same time because of who she was. And she had taken care of my grandmother, just like Sheila had done when she said that she and her stepdad and her grandmother had all lived together. That my grandmother was living with my mom and dad, and she had Alzheimer's. And so we watched her kind of decline. But what was interesting is that my mom started to decline while she was taking care of her mom. So dad began to notice this, and he would tell us things, but we didn't want to really believe it, or I didn't. I can't speak for my sister, but I just kind of thought, oh, he's exaggerating. And it was just, and that's kind of a common thing. I'm just going to be real when I talk about this, because you want to deny it. You don't want to know that your mom is losing her memory. And until one day, we had stopped by their house. They lived in Dothan and we lived in Birmingham. And I noticed that she had been washing dishes with a bar of soap. And if you knew my mom, if that had been somebody else, maybe it was been maybe okay. But that was just, I knew then, oh, what he's saying is right, because she was very particular and her house was she just did everything over the top excellence. She was kind of a perfectionist. So my dad then, his health began to decline physically, but his mind was great, but her mind declined and her body was great. So together, they did really well. So he began to have to go to the ER because he had emphysema, and he would feel like he couldn't breathe. And I know she was probably bringing more anxiety on him, which didn't help. And so every time he would go to the ER, I would have to get childcare for my kids, get everything settled here and go down there and spend the weekend, or my sister would have to come from New Orleans.
How old, Lynita? How old were your children?
Oh, they were every, they could have been a poster for a child development class at Auburn, because they were high school, junior high, elementary, and toddler. It was all the way through, the whole gamut. And so we were going to the beach. This is how we got them to come. And it's a really cool story, because we had planned a week at the beach. It was our vacation. And so we always go through Dothan and just check on them when we do anything like that. So we had arranged it where we knew something was going to happen. Like they're going to have to move now, because mom was still driving to take care of my grandmother. So she didn't need to be driving, because my grandmother was in a nursing home by now in Dothan. And this is how my mom was. She would iron my grandmother's gowns. So we go to have the talk on the way down there. And my sister and my brother-in-law had come over from New Orleans. So we all gather around to have the talk. Okay. Well, they thought my husband just shot the moon. Like he could do no wrong, which is good. You want that. But, so Linda and I, my sister, just kind of look at each other like, what do we say? They're not going to listen to us. They never did. And, but then when Stuart spoke, they listened. So he said, from what we see, your doctor's saying you need help. Your friends are saying you need help. So he brought other people in that helped it not being us being pushy. And he said, and we would love to help you. And we see that these are your options. You can either go to a retirement home here, which would become a nursing home, but that's going to eat up all your money pretty soon. But you could be here with your friends and your people in your community. That's choice one. Choice two, you can go live with Linda, who lives in New Orleans. All her kids are gone. She has 4 bedrooms, huge house. She doesn't mind you coming there. Or you can come live with us. We have a child in every stage. We have a basement that we will turn into an apartment for you. And this is a good point. We will use our money. We will not take your money and put it into our house because you don't want anything to come between the siblings. I mean, we just didn't, I don't think it would have, but you just want to avoid that anyway. And so they chose us.
Surprise!
It was mainly because they would still be in Alabama. They still had the same football teams, the same governor, the same news. And to them, Louisiana was like another country. So, they didn't want to go there. So they came to live with us. And so we went on to, before they did that, we went on to the beach. This is very interesting. And before we had left, I need to back up just a minute. It was Stuart had something going on at work, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the details, that caused us to have to bring 2 cars. And that was super inconvenient. So we were going to leave one car in Dothan and then go on down to the beach in the other car. And I remember just wanting to be angry about that and then stopping and thanking the Lord, because Sheila has taught me to do that in all things. And so, not that I always do that, but I did this time. And then we go to the beach, we come back, we're in a hurry to get back. We've already had the talk. We've already seen them. So they were just going to drop me off. I was going to get in the other car and come on. Well, they left. They dropped me off. I go in the house. The phone is ringing. It's my sister. She says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're there. They're coming to get Big Mom." My mom's sister was coming to get the grandmother. And we knew this would be somebody who irons your gowns. This is going to be a big deal to take her away. And so Linda was like, if you hadn't been there, I was going to jump in the car and come over there. And so that's why that car was there. Wow. So I could stay. And so I spent the night. It made all the difference in the world because they couldn't get Mom to sign the papers to release her because she has power of attorney. Oh. So I had to go down there and get Mom. I got her to sign them. And so my aunt came and my cousin, and they got her. And it was because that had to happen before we could get my mom and dad to come up there. So then from there, we began to redo the downstairs. We had that done. He had already sold the car. She was so mad about that. And then they moved up.
God wasn't going to give us all the answers all at one time. Mm-hmm. That it was going to be a process, because for me, it was 11 years. My grandmother moved in with us. She lived with us for 4 years before she passed away. She was 97. She was a delight. Mm-hmm. Her memory was wonderful. We didn't have any issues that way at all. And then she passed away at 97. And then God was gracious because nobody was in the same situation, at the same time. And then my stepfather, who had Alzheimer's, then got really bad. In fact, he finally was in the bed for 1 solid year. And had to be cared for. Now, thank goodness my parents had the wherewithal for us to take care of them in that situation in our home. And that's what Lynita said earlier. There's not a concrete answer for every situation. There's just not. For us, this was the answer. And we had sitters around the clock. That was quite pricey, but not as pricey it would have been to put him in a nursing home. But it was really cost a lot of money to do that. And he was wonderful. He was your perfect Alzheimer's patient. No anger, just no frustration, just precious. I think one time I remember him getting upset one time with me, and he started to cry and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I said, "Well, let's talk to the Lord about it." And we did, and he was fine. But he was wonderful. He really was such a precious man of God. And we just didn't have some of those other things that are what they are. I mean, everybody responds differently in those situations. And after that year, he passed away at the end of that time. And then we had my mother there with us for the next 4 years, just Mom. Now, and so every step of the way was different for us. My mother was mother didn't have Alzheimer's, but she had dementia, and it was bad enough that she would get frustrated with me a lot because I couldn't make it okay. I couldn't, and I would tell her I'd told her something and she didn't remember. And it was just it was hard. It was a hard 4 years for her and for me as well. We got the sitter situation. We'd had sitters with Mama, we had sitters with John, but when it came time to have sitters with Mom, she was not happy about it. And so I finally just said, Mom, this is for me. And I'm an only child. I have stepbrothers and sisters who are wonderful, but I said, this is for me. And I need some time. My husband's still a senator. We did, like Lynita said, we had 2 weddings. We had, all the 2 grandbabies eventually during all that time that was going on. And it was a lot, life kept going. And that's why I'm saying, how do we live in the land of the dying? And be faithful to our parents, be faithful to what God's called us to do, and yet continue to live. That's tricky. I know Lynita said her mother began to decline as she was taking care of her grandmother. And that often happens with a caregiver. And so we just tried to work things out. And I said, well, this is for me. And so I don't feel good about leaving you here by yourself anymore. When it became like I couldn't leave her at all, we began to have sitters come in. Now, thank goodness for a wonderful lady named Mary Jo. She was just a delight. And my mother loved her. She had helped with Mama and John as well. And my mother absolutely loved her. And she thought she was just a friend that was coming to visit. And so that was great. I mean, I just went with it, you just kind of learn those things. But I guess my advice in the journey, don't forget that you have to continue to live. You can't lay down and die with them. You cannot. And you have to continue your life and continue to live. And so I told one gal that was going through the situation with her mom, and I said, you've just entered the land of no good decisions. You do the best decision you can possibly make. There's not a wonderful decision that's going to make everything okay. And Lynita and I are both a party wanting to happen. And so, we just want everything to be wonderful. Let's all have fun and let's just have a party. Well, that just didn't happen. And so you have to learn to live where you are and thank the Lord for where you are, moment by moment by moment, and walk in that place as we continue to make decisions little by little by little by little, and honoring our parents and walking that tightrope. And Lynita addressed the fact that this becomes a role reversal. And
yes, it does. It does. It becomes a huge role reversal because you're caring for them. And I remember telling my mom one time, she would, fight me, not, like she didn't want to yield to what you suggested. She wanted to be in charge. And that's when I said, well, I'm in charge now. And that was kind of a jump back, hard thing to do. And just on that note, I remember was one of those moments that you just don't forget. My dad, like I said, his physical, he was here for a while, and then he passed away first. But I remember he got to where it was hard for him to go to the bathroom, so I had to empty his bedpan and I had to change sheets a lot. And that is for all you people out there who have the gifts of service and helps, you just been in your element. But I do not. That's not my gift. And so that's a real challenge for me. And I remember one time taking his bedpan over and going, I should hate this. And it just hit me. I'm delighting in this. It was just a weird supernatural, because God was doing it through me. And, it wasn't natural for me to want to do that at all. It isn't really for anybody, but especially me. That was just like an aha moment. And that just spurred me on to want to do it even more. But there were so many funny things here. That's another thing that I would say that I did, which it wasn't forced. It's just kind of who I am. But I just really kept a sense of humor through the whole thing, because there's so many things that are so funny. And Mother would lose her dentures all the time. And I would, put an alert out to all the kids to whoever finds Nani's dentures gets $5, and they would find them like pretty quick. Somebody would find them. She's lost her dentures again, and she did that often. And then I remember one time. Now there's a couple more. I'll tell two more funnies. These are funny. I remember one time taking them. It was them and me from Dothan. I had to go to Dothan, get them, and take them to Columbus, Mississippi, to my uncle's funeral. And so Dad had his oxygen tank and all that, and it was just it was just hard to take them anywhere. And then when we took them home, Stuart was with me, and so he was driving, and Mother and I were in the back seat, and she would talk all the time, just continually, and she'd read every sign, and she'd say the same thing. This is a common thing with Alzheimer's. They say the same thing over and over again, and ask the same question over and over again. And she would say, well, this looks like Bruton, but this looks like Andalusia, everywhere, because that's where she grew up. And so she'd talk about that. And so there was a bag of oranges sitting between us. So I peeled an orange and gave it to her, and she was quiet because she was eating it. So I just kept peeling these oranges and kept. She ate oranges. I'm not making this up. It made the biggest difference. And then one more thing. This is kind of funny. This is about my dad, and he was a real cut up who loved life, and but he was serious this time. My daughter Jana was down there visiting with them, and my children. Just a side note on that. This was so good for my children. Don't ever think that this will take away from your children. If you can handle this, it shows them servant hearts. It shows them how to love, or how to honor their parents, and it shows them a lot about you being willing to do that. So Jana was over down in their apartment, and she comes out and tells us, I think Papa just ordered a pool table. And we said, what? So he'd always wanted a pool table, and they built a room to have one, but for some reason they never got one. And so he's ordering a pool table, and he had called the man and said, I want the top of the line, the most expensive, the best one you have. And the man thought it was a joke, and then thought somebody was playing a joke on him. And then Dad started giving him his credit card number. Well, so we intervened, and we kind of wanted him to have it, but we didn't want it to be at our house. Again, it's that thing where we wanted to, because it would be, if he ordered a pool table, it would be in our house and it would never get moved. And so I asked my brother and my sister what they thought about it, and they said sure, do it. So he ordered. We didn't get the top of the line, but we got a nice one and had it put down there. And he played pool a couple of times. And what gave him a thrill was my son Judson began to play, and he got really good, and he loved to just watch him play. So that was just a real delight and a joy that was kind of funny, but it turned out fine. And then my dad actually passed away, and my brother came, and he was to the funeral. He looks a lot like my dad, and so Mom thought it was him, and so she latched onto him like the whole time. And then when we left and he went off with his wife, she thought he was cheating on her. So, I know. But then she forgets when she gets home. So that is the good thing and the bad thing about losing your memory is you do forget.
And the fun and to learn to laugh at situations. I remember one time my stepfather came into our side of the house. He usually knocked before he came in. He just came in and he said, Hank, because he always knew who Hank was. And he said, Hank, there's a woman over there that says she's my wife. Is that And so, but then at the same time, something happened to him that really broke my heart. His wife had Lou Gehr's disease and died. And my father had died, and Mother and John had married one another. And they'd been married for over 30 years at that point. And we were sitting on the couch on their side of the house, and he looked at me and he said, Sheila, where is Lee? Well, I just didn't even think. And I said, well, oh, John, she's been dead for over 30 years. And it was just like it had just happened. And he started to weep. And it just broke my heart. And so it's not easy for anybody. Either situation is not easy for anybody. I know Lynita, they finally ended up putting her mother in the nursing home for a short period of time. That worked for them at that point. Every situation is different. And so I just want to encourage you that you're not by yourself. Don't do this alone. Have friends that are praying for you, that help you along the way, that maybe come in and help, or whatever situation it is that you need help with. Tell people. And if you're on the other end of the stick and you've got a friend that's walking through this, ask them what they need. Oh. What can I do for you?
Yeah.
What can I do for you? I know Lynita one time came, and Mother had gotten to know Lynita through a Bible study I taught. And Lynita came. I don't know if you remember doing this, but it was in the fall, and she brought Mother this beautiful white pumpkin. And my mother kept that pumpkin forever. She just thought that was the neatest present. She loved that pumpkin, and it stayed in her dining room for, I don't think it ever rotted. I don't know, but it was a long time. But just her coming and spending some time with Mother, giving Mother a feeling of having some friends. And we would have friends from in Gadsden, where my parents would visit as well. But those people that can come alongside you and help you with this are very important, because it's a very hard situation. That's all we're saying. But for this, you have Jesus. For this, you have Jesus. That's my mantra. As we walk through hard situations, for this, we have Jesus. I remember after Mother passed away, and those 4 years had been very, very difficult. I was exhausted. It had been very hard for her. It had been hard for me. She ended up having a couple of strokes, and it was just a difficult place. I'll be honest. It was very, very hard. And so after she passed away, I remember I was in my living room, just standing there and talking to the Lord. And the Lord, I didn't hear his voice audibly, of course, but in my heart, I felt him say to me, daughter, you walked through the fire, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and you don't smell of smoke. That's what you want to be able to do, is to walk through the situation that God's got you in, and to learn to trust him in that place. I'm not saying it's not going to be hard. I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult. I'm not saying there's going to be things that don't just absolutely rip your heart out as you watch your parents decline in years. But for this, you have Jesus. Never forget that. So God bless. Thank you for joining us.